Sleep Awake gives the impression of a project born from a very specific obsession, transforming insomnia into cosmic horror, almost as if the entire game were a delusion of someone who has passed the 40th hour awake. The way the concept sleep equals disappearance is treated gives the impression of a game conceived first as a sensory and thematic experience, and only later organized as a traditional video game. The development context becomes more interesting when you remember who is behind it. Corey Davis of Spec Ops: The Line, and Robin Fink of 9 Inch Nails. This already sets an expectation for something heavy, uncomfortable, and with a very auteur vision of horror, more interested in messing with the player's head than just delivering cheap scares. Another thing that draws attention in this context is the partnership with Blumhouse Games. Blumhouse doesn't get involved in just anything, so there is the feeling that care was taken for Sleep Awake to have a clear identity within their catalog, almost as the horror game that is meant to be strange, noisy, and disturbing, not necessarily popular and accessible. The world itself, this last city called The Crush, with people in crisis, fanatic factions, and crazy experiments to stay awake, gives off a strong vibe of a project that drew from research on sleep disorders and the team's personal experiences. Instead of just throwing in some apocalypse, it seems the devs wanted to build an entire dystopia based on the fear of sleeping, mental collapses, and cults that transform pain and electricity into religion. From a design perspective, the choice of stealth, vulnerability, and narrative focus reinforces this idea of a development more guided by atmosphere than by a complex combat system. Katya does not sound like a protagonist with power, but as someone who is always at her physical and emotional limit, which is consistent with the proposal of a game made to leave you tense, tired, and a little lost, almost mirroring the state of the characters. The general impression, looking only at what has been shown so far, is of a project that started small, very auteur, and gained structure and visibility with Blumhouse's entry, without losing its identity as an experimental nightmare. It gives the feeling of a game that could divide the public greatly. For those who like more conceptual horror, Sleep Awake seems promising. For those who expect something direct and easy to digest, this development focused on psychedelia, FMV, and industrial sound has everything to be as fascinating as it is uncomfortable. The story of Sleep Awake, from what has been disclosed and playing the demo, brings a very unique and immersive experience that mixes psychological horror with an atmosphere reminiscent of a lucid nightmare. The protagonist, Katya, is desperate to stay awake in a decaying city where people disappear during sleep, and this premise already creates constant tension, as the fear of sleeping is palpable and truly conveyed in the game. Her sense of mental exhaustion, combined with the effort to create solutions to keep her awake, connects the player with a very real and psychological fear, giving the plot a very personal tone. The narrative unfolds in a fragmented and surreal way, especially with sequences that occur in the dream or in a space between sleep and death, called the swell, where Katya encounters a mysterious woman and faces disturbing figures. This mixture of dream and reality leaves the story open to multiple interpretations, which can attract players who enjoy deciphering layers and who prefer a less linear and more symbolic plot. The demo already shows that the impact comes not only from the story itself, but from the way it affects the emotional state of the protagonist and the player. Another interesting point is the chaotic world around Katya, a ruined city where cults and oppressive forces like the paramilitary police DTM dominate the scene. This setting gives greater weight to Katya's struggle, as in addition to combating her sleep and the abstract threat of the hush, she faces real and tangible dangers, such as fanaticism and brutal repression. This makes the story more multifaceted, with both internal and external conflict, deepening the narrative experience. Mixing psychological horror, a plot with themes of loss and isolation, and the exploration of a decaying world creates an atmosphere of constant tension and vulnerability. For me, the story has a very strong dystopian nightmare feel, which manages to be scary without resorting only to cheap scares, but by provoking a lasting discomfort. This type of storytelling seems promising for those who enjoy dense, dark plots that explore the protagonist's psyche in a raw way. The demo also shows a balance between narrative and gameplay mechanics, highlighting stealth and exploration as ways to survive in this hostile environment. This helps to immerse oneself in the protagonist's world and increase the emotional connection with her journey, without the story losing pace or becoming just a backdrop for action. I realize that the feeling of always being on the verge of falling asleep threatens the stability of the protagonist and the player, reinforcing the narrative tension. If I had to point out a criticism or something that left me curious, it is the fact that the story still seems a little nebulous in the demo, with many elements not completely explained. This can be a risk or a potential, depending on how much the game will develop this mythology involving the Hush, the cults, and Katja's own role in the larger plot. I hope the game maintains this surreal tone, but provides enough answers and depth so that the narrative does not become just a tangle of unconnected images. Overall, the story of Sleepawake seemed to me a very bold and atmospheric approach to horror, focused on the psychological and an intense emotional journey. The demo fulfilled the role of making me anxious to discover more about Katja, her struggle to stay awake, and to unravel the mystery of the city. All with a narrative that combines the dark realism of the world with the abstraction of lucid nightmares. Something that seems fresh and strongly identifiable for the genre this year. The gameplay of Sleepawake, from what I saw in the demo I played, seems to me an experience that truly stands out for its unique mood and atmosphere. It is a first-person horror game that mixes stealth, survival, and puzzles, but its great asset is truly in the way all of this is presented, with a strongly psychedelic and immersive feel. The sensation of being between sleep and death, navigating a distorted and disturbing world, is something that holds attention and creates constant tension, even with relatively simple mechanics. The use of the first-person perspective works very well to increase immersion, putting the player in the eyes of the protagonist, Katja. This helps to dive not only into the fear and suspense, but also into the character's emotions in the face of everything that happens. Despite this, sometimes this immersion can make the character a little transparent, a type of avatar to experience the scare, rather than someone with whom you create a direct emotional bond. Still, the game seems to manage this carefully so as not to lose the narrative impact. The demo highlights gameplay that combines tense stealth and heart-pounding escape moments. Enemies are not so perceptive visually, but the tension arises from the need to control your steps and use the environment to your advantage, hiding and going unnoticed. These moments are accompanied by a soundtrack that masterfully complements the mood, increasing the feeling of being in a vivid nightmare. It is simple gameplay, but it delivers strong sensations with its execution of atmosphere. Another point that draws attention is the exploration of the fragmented and post-apocalyptic world, with destroyed buildings, desolate streets, and an aesthetic that blends dirty reality with surreal and distorted visuals that evoke a psychedelic trip. This setting works not only as a backdrop, but as an active factor to increase anguish and strangeness, constantly leaving the player questioning what is real in that universe. The demo knew how to balance these two layers well. The challenge of the central mechanic, which is keeping the character awake to avoid being captured by a mysterious entity called the Hush, brings constant tension to the gameplay. This pressure to need to remain awake and alert creates a dynamic different from what we are used to in traditional horror games, which is quite refreshing. At times, this translates into a management of the state of wakefulness, which directly influences the chances of survival and the pace of exploration. Another interesting aspect is the use of sequences that mix live-action videos with the 3D gameplay, creating a bridge between reality and the world of dreams, nightmares, in which Katja is immersed. This breaks the traditional flow of the game and adds an artistic and narrative layer that gives more depth to the experience. These moments are confusing, intriguing, and give a personal and unique touch to the story, differentiating Sleep Awake from many other titles in the genre. Looking at the overall demo experience, Sleep Awake left me with the feeling of being in a vivid and unforgettable nightmare, the kind you don't easily forget. The combination of visual psychedelia, the striking soundtrack, strategic stealth, and the dense narrative created something unique in current horror. If the full game maintains this authenticity and expands the gameplay elements with the same quality, it has everything to be a title that will mark the genre and captivate fans for a long time. The graphics make a very strong impression right away, mainly by mixing the dark realism of a post-apocalyptic city with moments of psychedelia and almost surreal images. From the demo, you can feel that the game does not just invest in common graphics, but in using visual effects like depth of field and distortions to create an atmosphere that is both beautiful and disturbing, something that is rare in horror games today. This constant visual manipulation is a differential that seemed to work very well for me to increase immersion in the nightmare mood that the game proposes. One point that struck me was the way light and textures are worked. The environments generally look dirty and decayed, but have this cinematic quality, reminiscent of a psychedelic horror film. The transitions to more ethereal and hallucinogenic spaces are a visual shock that came as a respite from the gray monotony of the destroyed urban areas. And these changes reinforce the feeling that we are navigating between the real world and an almost dreamlike state. The demo also showed that the graphics play a fundamental role in telling the story through atmosphere. There are not many explicit details delivered visually, but everything is built on the mood and feeling that the images convey. This graphical choice makes you engage with the game not exactly by what you see, but by what you feel. The discomfort, the tension, the fear. Something that goes beyond the simple technical quality of the graphics. Even being a first-person game and focused on direct immersion, there was a clear concern to keep the protagonist Katja a well-defined character, which prevents the graphics from simply functioning as an empty filter and helps to humanize the dark visual environment. This makes the graphics dialogue with her emotional state, as if the visual deterioration reflected the character's internal struggle against sleep and the threatening entity. Another aspect that caught my attention is that Sleep Awake's graphics do not seek pure realism or hyperrealism. Instead, they are a mixture of real and surreal that elevates the game to an artistic level, which for me is more interesting than just thinking about technically impressive graphics. The visual psychedelia and the disturbing images are constructed to move the player on an emotional level, and not just a visual one. In the demo, moments of transition between the normal world and these distorted spaces presented creative visual effects that almost looked like scenes from a psychedelic music video, which gives Sleep Awake a very strong identity. This creates a unique visual experience, where it is not just the traditional post-apocalyptic setting, but a deep dive into the strange and the psychologically uncomfortable. The graphics seemed perfectly aligned with the game's tone. They are a mixture of fear, strangeness, and fascination. Although the demo shows that the game is still in development, the visual style already delivers a promise that the impact will be both emotional and aesthetic. It is a game that you do not play only with your eyes, but with your mind. And that, for me, is the greatest compliment that can be paid to a psychedelic horror game. The performance of Sleep Awake in the demo left me with mixed impressions. As soon as I started playing, I noticed that the game runs relatively stably, but with some moments where the fluidity dropped, especially in more complex scenes or during transitions between dreamlike and real environments. This showed that, for a game with visuals so loaded with psychedelic effects, optimization could still be an area for improvement. What caught my attention was that the game seems to require a moderately powerful machine to run well, something common in games that use the Unreal Engine 4 and bet on elaborate graphics and intense visual effects. For those who expected perfect fluidity since the demo, it may be a slight inconvenience, but nothing that completely compromised the immersion or the horror experience that the game delivers. In some specific moments, when waking the PC from sleep mode, the game showed significant performance drops, even becoming somewhat sluggish until I restarted the application. This is a technical problem that does not seem to be directly linked to the graphics engine, but rather to how the game manages the system state, something that will probably be corrected in future patches. Still, it was something that caught my attention, as it can bother those who like to leave the game paused for periods. The feeling during the demo is that the game's performance, although not perfect, is at an acceptable level for an ambitious indie title. I did not see constant crashes or lag that generally hindered the gameplay, but there was a certain heaviness in some scenes, probably because of the multiple visual effects and the complex dynamic lighting that the game uses to achieve that psychedelic nightmare atmosphere. Another positive point is that, despite the graphical complexity, the game did not sacrifice the responsiveness of the controls. Character movement, stealth commands, and interaction occurred fluently, which for me is a clear sign that the team is focused on guaranteeing playable performance even with the loaded visual style. It seems to me that the game is clearly at a stage where performance is more focused on ensuring the atmosphere and narrative experience, rather than seeking maximum frames per second. This may not please the purists who seek absolute fluidity, but honestly, for the type of immersion that Sleep Awake wants to create, a little stiffness in performance does not diminish the impact. The performance of the Sleep Awake demo seems adequate for what the game aims to deliver, with some areas for technical improvements that should be adjusted by the full release. The visual and narrative experience outweighs the small occasional flaws, and the game still maintains good control and fluidity most of the time, which for a title like this is already an excellent indication of potential. Sleep Awake is a first-person psychological horror game that heavily relies on atmosphere, immersive narrative, and psychedelic sequences to create an experience of deep fear and discomfort. I realize that the game brings a proposal that slightly deviates from traditional horror with cheap scares, focusing more on an emotional and visual terror that captivates with its surreal and disturbing mood. For those who enjoy a Silent Hill vibe mixed with an experimental approach, Sleep Awake promises to deliver an immersive environment and a dense story, marked by the struggle to stay awake in an apocalyptic world taken over by mysterious entities called the Hush. The demo impressed me precisely with its balance between beautiful, psychedelic moments and others of pure tension, with stealth and resource gathering to stay awake. The heavy, somewhat industrial soundtrack helps to immerse oneself in this chaotic universe, giving an emotional weight that makes the game stick in your mind. The gameplay is simple, focused more on exploration, solving puzzles, and avoiding enemies, very much in the classic survival horror style, but seasoned with these dreamlike sequences that provide unique freshness. This makes me think that the game is especially suitable for those who like atmospheric experiences that value the narrative side along with impactful visuals more than frenetic action. Sleep Awake is not for everyone. If you are looking for more direct horror, with many easy scares or intense combat, you might be frustrated with the slower and more immersive approach. The greater focus is on world building, the feeling of despair, and the exploration of themes like sleep, death, and paranoia. Therefore, the game connects better with fans of psychological horror, strong narrative, and disturbing aesthetics. It also seems like a title made for those who enjoy subjective interpretations of the story, without clear answers, and enjoying the mystery and symbolism. Since the demo already delivers a very solid experience in terms of atmosphere and plot, buying at launch has its merit for those who seek precisely this approach, because the game has the potential to stand out in the indie and psychological horror space. However, it is worth keeping in mind that the gameplay is moderately simple, and may not hold the attention of those who expect a lot of variety or more intense action. The ideal is to purchase if you enjoy narrative games with stealth and puzzles in an environment of constant tension and want to follow the unfolding of this mysterious story from the beginning. On the other hand, If you are a player who prefers to wait for more complete reviews and see how the game holds up over time, it may be safer to wait. Sleep Awake is still a somewhat artistic gamble and may divide opinions, so observing post-launch analyses can help decide if it was worth it for your personal taste. But, either way, the demo already reveals that the title delivers a unique experience, which is encouraging for those who enjoy more cerebral and immersive horror. The game is recommended for fans of psychological horror, atmospheric games, deep narrative, and differentiated first-person visual aesthetics. Those who like to explore existential themes between dream and reality will feel at home. Those who enjoy a dark and surreal setting, with a pace that prioritizes tension and mystery without rush or unrestrained action, will find Sleep Awake a challenging and fascinating experience. Conversely, those who want something more direct or gameplay-oriented should think carefully about whether this is the right time to invest. Sleep Awake is worth buying at launch, especially if you are passionate about horror games that break the mold and offer a denser narrative and breathtaking visuals. The demonstration has already left me anxious to see how Kacha's story will unfold and how the chaotic universe will expand, with the soundtrack and visual effects helping to create an almost hypnotic immersion. For those who like to be trapped in the atmosphere and prefer to interpret the game rather than rush into action, Sleep Awake has a lot going for it from day one.
Ah, shit. Drifting again. How long have I been walking? Okay, my marker. On the right track. Best hurry along. That dose won't last forever.
Street's clear. No strays to be found.